Diplomatic relations between the United Kingdom and Russia have again reached nadir with the recent tit-for-tat expulsions of diplomats, accusations of espionage, and the incendiary rhetoric reminiscent of the height of the Cold War and of extraordinary stories of people being expelled from Moscow and secreting microfilm in packets of sweets. And while the post-Soviet thaw that once again saw economic ties flourish between Moscow and London, and I was a part of that, I hope, the ongoing war in Ukraine and Britain's strong support for Kyiv have positioned the UK as one of Russia's key Western antagonists. And in the latest round of diplomatic expulsions, 2 British diplomats were expelled from Russia on allegations of espionage, a claim swiftly dismissed by the UK Foreign Office as entirely false. And in response, Britain has revoked the accreditation of a Russian diplomat and a diplomatic spouse, and this ongoing series of retaliatory measures follows a broader pattern of expulsions that began in earnest following Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, with at least 7 British diplomats forced out of Moscow over the past year alone. The UK has not hesitated to respond in kind, expelling Russian diplomatic personnel in May 2024, September 2024, November 2024, citing intelligence concerns. And the British government's assessment is clear. Moscow is actively seeking to drive the British embassy in Moscow towards closure. And such a move would further degrade already tenuous diplomatic relations and heighten tensions in an already fraught global landscape. What is particularly striking in the latest escalation is the increasingly Victorian-era rhetoric emanating from Moscow, and the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR, has labelled Britain as a warmonger, accusing London of sabotaging efforts, specifically those championed by Donald Trump, to broker a peace deal in Ukraine. And the invocation of the term perfidious Albion, a phrase steeped in historical grievance against British foreign policy, signals a strategic attempt to frame the UK as the arch-villain of global instability. Russian state media has revived a 19th century slogan, "The English woman relieves herself," in an old imperial phrase implying Britain's systematic meddling in Russian affairs, and the reference to London's role in the Crimean War in 1853 and its participation in the 2 world wars as alleged warmongers suggests a concerted effort to historicise contemporary grievances. I mean, this sort of slightly overlooks the fact that in the Second World War we were allies. And this narrative aligns with Russia's broader attempt to cast itself as a victim of Western aggression, an image Putin himself has used to justify his policies domestically. And while Trump seeks to reset relations with Moscow, Britain now finds itself singled out as Russia's principal antagonist in the West. This is a marked shift from the past 2 years when Washington was the primary target of Russian ire due to its financial and military support for Kyiv. And the British Prime Minister, Keir Starmer, his suggestion of placing UK boots on the ground in Ukraine, albeit in a peacekeeping capacity, has further inflamed tension. Russia has seized on these statements as evidence of Britain's belligerence, despite the lack of concrete UK deployment plans. Furthermore, Moscow has explicitly threatened British economic interests, with key Putin allies suggesting that UK assets inside Russia could now be seized. And British-Russian trade has already plummeted, dropping from £16 billion in 2021 to just over £2 billion in 2023, with major corporations like BP absorbing substantial financial losses due to its political rift. Meanwhile, Russia's parliament has floated the idea of permanently barring British firms from any future reintegration into the Russian economy should Western sanctions be lifted. And Russian state television has mocked the UK's diminishing military capabilities, with commentators quipping that the entirety of Britain's army, now less than 75,000 active personnel, could fit inside London's Wembley Stadium. Well, it's probably true. The Kremlin's attempt to cast Britain as both a major threat and a weak military power, inconsistent, reflects this internal contradiction in its propaganda. On the one hand, London is blamed for leading Western military efforts to support Ukraine, and on the other, it's depicted as incapable of posing a genuine challenge to Russian might. Well, one or the other. Come on, you can't have both. And at the same time, the UK's intelligence capabilities remain a major irritant to Moscow. The UK was the first country to pledge Western main battle tanks to Ukraine and has played a crucial role in providing Kyiv with intelligence, weapons and financial support. And Russia's accusations that Britain was behind Ukrainian sabotage efforts, such as the attacks on the Crimean bridge, further illustrate how central London is to Moscow's strategic calculations and to Russia's current propaganda. The ongoing diplomatic expulsions, the Cold War-era rhetoric, the threats of economic retribution suggest that UK-Russian relations are set to deteriorate even further. And with Trump's approach to Russia softening, Britain risks finding itself increasingly isolated in its hardline stance against Moscow. If diplomatic ties are severed altogether, it would mark a significant moment in the global realignment of the post-Ukraine war world. And while the UK remains steadfast in its support for Ukraine, the question remains, will this escalation lead to a broader crisis, or is it merely a continuation of the tit-for-tat exchanges that have long defined UK-Russian relations? Only time will tell. But history suggests that Britain and Russia are once again locked in a familiar, if dangerous, dance.